Hey guys, no fancy effects today, but I have an update on the Dan Didio situation, um, and it's not good. So sources say that Dan was actually fired by AT&T, and they are still going with woke 5G in mid 2021. Regardless of what happened with all new, all different Marvel and how that failed, DC and Warner Brothers see this as their last hurrah before AT&T closes the publisher for good, which I know maybe some of you Marvel fans would be celebrating that news, but let me just tell you that if AT&T takes the initiative to close a comic book giant like DC, don't think for a second that Disney's not going to follow suit, because Marvel has been underperforming just as much, if not more, than DC, and Warner Brothers and AT&T are still keeping it around. If they close down DC, Disney will do the same thing to Marvel and do exactly what AT&T is going to do, which would be reprint 80 plus years of content, hire some talented and fan favorite artists and writers to make new graphic novels a couple times a year, focused on television shows and animation and movies and toys and video games, etc., and just stop making new monthly comics to save money. And that's terrible. Also, in regards to DC 5G, it's a lot worse than we thought. And apparently, according to information I have, and actually others have heard, is that AT&T is not listening to the old guard or the veterans or the sane people at DC Comics. They're listening to the crazed NPC writers and artists that were hired by Dan Didio, and they are a very loud but vocal minority at DC, and AT&T is listening to them in regards of what's going to happen to the characters you love. And sadly, AT&T is not a normal company. They are a woke company. Danny Boy's mindset was actually kind of middle ground. He was in the middle of everything. He understood what the comic book veterans wanted when they made their books, and he could see where the crazies were coming from when they were pushing their agendas in their books. So he was like a middleman, basically. He did his best as a leader to appease both groups, and that's why DC has always been kind of 50-50. It's had two different philosophies, conservative and liberal. Now, with him gone, it's probably going to go full far left, more or less, because they're not listening to some of the veterans there that are saying that 5G would be the death of DC and harm comic books as a whole, because Marvel's All New Different did not help Marvel sell books. It did the opposite. And the people that were pleasing them, the Twitter Puritans, didn't buy books. And eventually Marvel had to do another soft reboot to bring back the characters that the fans love to begin with. DC won't get the chance to make a reboot. It'll be done. This is it. And this is what AT&T's plan is. They are going forward with the horrible DC 5G, which is more than just killing Batman, Superman, and Wonder Woman. Most of the Justice League is going to be gone and replaced with characters no one's even heard of. I mean, this is insane, people. I mean, I still can't believe it. So the crazy people that Dan hired that were formerly from Marvel are going to put DC Comics in the ground after 81 years in business. Jim Lee is rumored to be the sole chief executive officer at DC now. Unknown what this means for his WB TV and film role, since he was like the big cheese with that. As for why DC 5G is bad, more info has leaked, along with an official reveal will be this summer, unless things, by a miracle, it gets canceled by Warner Brothers, because this is AT&T pushing it, whereas Warner Brothers, the former parent company of DC, is trying their best for this not to happen, or so they say. Besides the death and replacement of Batman, Superman, and Wonder Woman by different races and genders, the current leader of the Justice League, Jon Stewart, will not be Green Lantern in DC 5G. He'll be replaced by a new Green Lantern who is kind of like a teenager or a kid. The Flash will be replaced by Captain Cold's son, and more legacy characters will be changed or killed during the next Crisis event and afterwards. When I mean changed, think about what Bendis did to Iceman, and you can probably guess who is first on their list. The reason why Dan Didio, the co-publisher, was most likely fired may have to do with the jack and price for comics on 5G, anywhere between $8 to $10 an issue for DC woke books coming in 2021, which would be a hard pass for most people. In fact, the current cost of comic books right now is already very expensive, and they're thinking about making it like $8 to $10 an issue for their 5G series. That's ridiculous. If 5G fails, AT&T will be closing DC as a publisher and focus on popular heroes for new graphic novels again, animated shows, movies, merch, and other projects. The only comics DC will print would be 80 plus years of reprints. And I just, for a second, I honestly thought that with Dan gone, that DC Comics would be allowed to go back to what it was, the stories and the characters that we love, the legacy characters getting being treated right. DC Comics has been a big part of my life for over 30 years, and to see themselves torpedo themselves like this is just, it's horrifying. But I don't see people like Bendis and Zoe Quinn and some of the other crazies at DC as DC Comics people. I see them as saboteurs. DC Comics, the reason why it works is because it's 50-50 left and right. It's not one political affiliation over the other. There was a balance, a yin and a yang. And now there's no more balance in the force, according to the leaked info. And that's horrifying, because we saw what happened to Marvel. I mean, Marvel was always very lefty back in the 60s, 70s, and then they became extreme. And, you know, they kind of cured themselves from the SJW cancer that had infected them, but they're still, you know, in remission. DC was kind of a place where all walks of life could come to read comics and find something that they liked about it without being spoon-fed some type of political agenda. And those days are over. I don't know what to think about DC Comics anymore. I've been loving James Tinian's thing with Batman, but it really feels like the more he was tweeting last year about giving Batman one last big hurrah of an amazing story, it just feels like he's known the entire time that Bruce Wayne is going to be gone forever. There won't be a way for DC to crawl out of this coffin that they're making for themselves. Maybe a graphic novel or something could come out and explain that 5G was retcon, but think about that for a second. The final new issues of DC Comics will be some of the crappiest books you've ever seen, and that's what's going to destroy over 80 years of a new mythology for people. I hate the saying, go woke, go broke, but we're witnessing it in real time. DC Comics is in big trouble. And if AT&T really thinks that giving us a black Batman, a gay Superman, a overweight Wonder Woman, a child Green Lantern, a villain as the Flash, they're more out of touch with reality than Marvel was when they did all new, all different heroes. And it's very sad. So, yeah, that's really all I had to say. I don't know what to do as a fan of DC Comics for my whole life. I'm just, even though it hasn't happened yet, if this is true, just thinking what's going to happen to Dick Grayson and Wally and Donna if they don't get their preferences changed I mean, Dick his whole life has loved Barbara or Starfire at one point, and they're just going to flip the switch and that's going to be it. Just like that. It's wrong. I guess just enjoy the books while you can and hope to God that somebody at DC has stones to stand up to AT&T like Dan did. But of course, if that's the case, I mean, they'll just get fired too. So I don't know if DC can be saved. I don't know if we can start a petition. If we say we're not going to buy their books, AT&T is just going to close DC down. I mean, it doesn't feel like a situation we can win anymore. I don't know. Like I said, this was a serious video. You guys can do whatever you want. I mean, it's still a rumor, but the fact that I've been reached out by so many different people in the industry I haven't talked to shy of a decade, and former comic book pros that are coming out of the woodwork and really investigating what happened to Dan, because Dan was a nice guy. He was kind of like a comic book villain sometimes. I had some fun writing a thread on Twitter about the 50 things Dan Didio did wrong to fans of Titans, Nightwing, Wally, Robbins, different Bat Family characters. They're probably repeating things. And it was fun to write that because, yeah, he screwed up a lot of things. But this was a man that went to conventions and met with the fans. He liked to tease people about Nightwing. He was a dude you could have a beer with. He always loved just talking about DC characters. The reason why he hates legacy characters, it's not a shocker that he didn't grow up with Robin and some of these other characters in the late 60s and 70s. DC had focused their comic books on adults. So Robin went to school, and Superboy and Supergirl kind of left the Superman books until the 80s. Superman was solo, which is Lois. Aquaman was solo. His son was killed by Black Manta. Dan was reading books at a time where superheroes were a solo act. So I get that. I do. But I started reading when the legacy characters did a lot of cool things in the 80s. And, it's okay for characters to age, Dan. I really don't care what you guys do with this video. I kind of feel like I'm watching a friend who has a terminal illness die in front of me. Like, and you're just waiting for them to go. I don't know. Maybe I'm crazy. But, yeah, that's it. That's my serious video. Not a happy video, but I'm dark. I was from the DC universe. I was from the DC universe. Huh.